restraint and discipline and all these words you hear, all the code words for we don't want to really spend money. Welcome everyone to the Monday edition of Fair Territory. We've got only a few weeks left in the season. We've got some interesting hot races. I wouldn't call them classic pennant races because we have a number of teams stumbling to the finish, but it is an interesting conclusion to the season. And it seems to me it's going to be a fascinating postseason because as we've discussed and as you've heard and read over the last few weeks, this thing looks like it's wide open. So let's go through the races and then I'm going to take a step back, look a little deeper at what is going on because there are some really fascinating things that are happening, some really intriguing trends, let's put it that way. So let's start with some of the standings. We'll go through it right here. Some of these races are decided, but not all of them. Let's start with the NL wildcard. You can see it right here if you're watching on YouTube. San Diego in the top position with a 2-game lead. Arizona next, a half game behind the Padres. And then the Mets and the Braves are now tied at a game and a half behind Arizona. You see the Cubs at the bottom. They're 5 out. Forget about the Cubs. So you have here a situation where all 4 of these teams could end up in any order. Okay, so that's the NL wildcard, and that's going to be probably the best of all these races down the stretch. Now, let's move on. You'll see here AL best record. This one's pretty intriguing too. New York, Baltimore, and Cleveland, that could go any which way. And even Kansas City, coming off their sweep of the Twins this weekend, has an outside shot. The Houston Astros, I don't know that they're in this particular race, but of course they've played extremely well for several months now. And finally, the AL wildcard. The AL wildcard, not as interesting as the NL. You see Baltimore in the commanding position. It'll be either Baltimore or the Yankees. Whichever team wins the AL East will be that top wildcard team. Then you have Kansas City, which is 3 games back of Baltimore, but now, after sweeping the Twins with a 2.5-game lead over Minnesota. And then you see Detroit, Seattle, and Boston. Detroit has had a terrific late season surge. Seattle and Boston, not so much. So what is interesting here, again, are some of the patterns, some of the things that are going on. Because what we're going to see here, as I show you the next set of things that I want to look at, these teams in the American League in particular, the top 4 teams, the teams with the 4 best records, are not exactly marching toward the finish line. These teams, in fact, are struggling and have been struggling for a while now. The Yankees, since June 18, 31-37. The Orioles, since June 21st, 33-37, both below 500 since late June. These are the 2 AL East powers. The Guardians, who have had a great year, but since June 25th, 30-36. And the Royals, another team with a great year, but since May 25th, 45-46. So if you're saying, okay, which team is stampeding toward the postseason here, the answer would be none of the above. Now, the Yankees are interesting because they just got Clark Schmidt and Luis Gil back. Both pitched well over the weekend, and their staff now looks a little bit more coherent. And even with what's going on in the late innings, seeing Luke Weaver get the save the other day, I'm kind of intrigued by the Yankees pitching here as we get closer, but who knows if they're indeed going to hold up. The Orioles, to me, have problems. They need Grayson Rodriguez back. No one knows when that is going to happen, if at all. And they offensively have not been the electric team that they were earlier in the season. The Guardians, as I wrote Friday, their starting pitching seems to be stabilizing. Alex Cobb now has a blister, but we'll see how that goes. And then the Royals, they've been kind of hot and cold of late. They lost 7 straight, then they've won 4 straight. But they too have decent starting pitching and could be an interesting team in the postseason. All right, so let's move forward now to some teams that are hot and some teams that are decidedly not. Let's start with the hot teams. These are teams that have played either well for a long period or recently. The Houston Astros, we mentioned them. They started 12-24. And at that time, I remember writing a column that was kind of saying, is this the end for the Astros? Dumb column, Ken. It wasn't the end. You cannot put these guys away. Since that 12-24 start, they are 65-42, have taken commanding lead in the AL West. The Mets, the hottest team in baseball, even though they lost yesterday, ending their 9-game winning streak. They're 56-32 since their 22-33 start. Joel Sherman of the New York Post, my friend, wrote an interesting column about them over the weekend, just pointing out how under David Stearns, they made some really terrific adjustments on the fly. Vientos was one, Jose Iglesias was another. They did some things in the bullpen. They've really done a good job. And then the other two teams on that list were teams that have been really good all year, but even better of late, the Dodgers and the Phillies. The Dodgers, for all their pitching craziness, and it is craziness, they still are the team with a commanding lead in the NL West, the team with the best record in the National League. And the Phillies, after a little bit of a lull there, seem to have righted the ship. In my estimation, those are the two best teams in the league, though I don't rule out San Diego if San Diego gets hot again. But let's look at this list, because this is the list of teams that are not particularly hot right now. And it's a list that is kind of long. The Twins, my gosh, they've lost 14 of 20. You see it right there. They're 6-14 in the last 20. They've only had Correa, Buxton, and Royce Lewis together for 17 games this season. Correa and Buxton still out. The Red Sox, third straight year, they've struggled in the second half. They've lost 19 of 30. And then there were the D-backs and Padres. Both those teams, if you remember, about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, were really hot. And since then, Diamondbacks 5-8, Padres 9-9, okay, but not as hot as they were before. The Brewers, I include them even though they're well ahead in the NL Central. They're also a 500 team in the last 18 games. And the Mariners, I include them as who's not, even though they're 9-7, because they're not materially that different in terms of their record from where they were under Scott Servais. 64-64 under Servais, 9-7 under Dan Wilson. So there you have it. Obviously, as we set up here, these last 3 weeks are going to be really interesting, just to see how this all plays out, to see if any of the top teams that have not been as hot in the American League suddenly get hot again. And to me, it would seem that the Yankees have the best chance of that. And it will also be interesting, of course, to see how these other races play out. The NL wild card, flip a coin. I have no idea how that's going to go. There are some critical series that will take place, including one between the Mets and Atlanta, second to last series of the season. Padres and Diamondbacks, last series of the season. The Mets also have 7 games left with the Phillies. So it's going to be a very difficult and trying schedule in many respects for them. But when teams are playing well or teams are playing not well, I'm not such a believer in, oh my gosh, strength of schedule matters, except when you're playing the White Sox. You should win every game against the White Sox. And the Red Sox didn't do that this weekend. But anyway, that's where it stands. And again, we've got a wild finish. We're going to have a wild, wide open postseason. I cannot tell you right now who I like as a World Series favorite. You might say, well, what about the Dodgers? Tell me who's going to pitch for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And then we can point to flaws with every one of these teams. That, though, is what makes this so fascinating. That is what is going to make for a crazy postseason. And I'm really looking forward to it. Time now for the Inside Dish, the part of the show where I go inside a story I've written, inside a trend in the game, or maybe expand upon something I said on a recent broadcast. And that's what I want to do today. On Saturday, I was in Kansas City for the Twins-Royals game, and we had an interesting conversation about the Royals offseason and really the Royals' entire MO since the offseason. How aggressively they've gone about it, how they've gone after players repeatedly going back to last winter. And it's an interesting juxtaposition with some of the teams that I wrote about last week, the teams that you could make a case aren't trying as hard as they should. Because the Royals are a low-revenue team. They're a team that you wouldn't expect to be aggressive. They really haven't been that aggressive in the past, except in certain instances. And yet, they have run circles around some of their competition, and that is why they're in such a commanding position right now. So let's go through it a little bit, and then I'll talk about a little bit of their thinking beyond that. So let's start with the offseason. The offseason is when this began. In the offseason, they signed 7 free agents, spent almost $110 million on their free agents. Lugo and Wacha obviously were great signs. Hunter Renfroe has contributed in the outfield, been hurt a little bit. Will Smith and Chris Stratton, those didn't really work out so well. And then Garrett Hampson and Adam Frazier, 2 guys who are more utility types. Now, again, those deals, not all of them worked. And of course, you see as well the extension for Bobby Witt Jr. That counts in their offseason spending. almost $290 million in guaranteed money committed. Now, as I was saying, not every one of those deals worked. Not every one of those deals or these deals is going to work. That's the way it goes in free agency. But when things did not go exactly smoothly, what did the Royals do? They kept going. They kept trying. So let's go to their deadline. The bullpen was a problem. They acquired Hunter Harvey, Michael Lorenzen, and Lucas Erceg. Lucas Erceg has been a terrific closer for them. Also acquired Paul DeJong, who has played fairly well at third base and has really been, like some of these other guys, kind of a stabilizing, veteran contributing force. So their bullpen is better now than it was, even with Hunter Harvey on the injured list. Lorenzen on the IL as well, but coming back, he contributed as a starter in his initial stint with the club, but I expect him to come back as a reliever. Now, again, they had some things go wrong, as all teams do. The big one, the injury to Vinny Pasquantino. That was late August. There wasn't a lot they could do at that point. The deadline had passed. But what did they do? Let's look at their August additions because they're telling and revealing as well. They go out and claim Robbie Grossman and Tommy Pham on waivers. They land both of them. Remember, waiver claims are awarded in reverse order of winning percentage. So they had dibs over teams with better records than them, but not teams with worse records than them. And then they traded for Yuli Gurriel, who can play first base, and they were allowed to make that trade because Yuli was not on a 40-man roster. So the Royals, from the offseason to the deadline to the waiver period, they have kept pushing. And it's a key thing because you look at the team that they swept this weekend, the Minnesota Twins. They were not aggressive in the offseason. They were a team that cited the uncertainty over their future local television revenue as a Bally's team as one of the reasons they didn't spend. Didn't do much at the deadline, didn't make any of those claims that the Royals did, even though they were behind the Royals in the standings and could have used a Tommy Pham or a Robbie Grossman, considering the kids that they're playing right now. That's a great example of a team that, frankly, should have done a little bit more, a lot more maybe. Now, then you have a situation where this team is looking to build a new ballpark. This team, the Royals, yes, they are looking for a new ballpark. Their owner, John Sherman, has been trying for that. It got voted down. They're still trying. They're still trying to make some things happen there. The Royals, too, are a Bally's team. They could have cited their future uncertainty with local television revenue, but they did not. Now, you could argue that because of the stadium push, that's why they signed Witt. That's why they took this seemingly newfound approach. Well, okay, perhaps that's true. But it kind of reminds me of when someone makes a huge charitable donation and people will say, well, that person is only doing that to look good. Well, great. He or she might be doing it to look good, but the charitable donation is still the charitable donation. And the Royals, for whatever their motives might be, their spending is their spending. They put a better product on the field. Their fans are energized, and it's an exciting team, a team that in the playoffs with Wacha and Lugo maybe has a chance to do some things. I'm omitting Brady Singer from that aspect as well, and of course Cole Reagans. They've got a decent rotation. So when you look at Kansas City, and then you look at Minnesota, and then you look at some of these other clubs, and Cleveland should be accepted here because they have not been aggressive, and yet they've had a great year. They kind of foil my argument, I guess. But for the most part, the Royals have spent, and they've spent well. The Reds spent last offseason, didn't spend well. So it's not that complicated, folks. If you're a team in the Royals' position, it might be difficult to sustain success. There's no question about that for the low revenue clubs. It's a harder equation. And who knows? Next year, Lugo might not be as good. Wacha could opt out. All kinds of things can happen. I get it. But here was a team that even after their offseason moves, Fangraphs laughed at, Pacoda had them at 70 wins, and yet they've had a pretty good vibe about them all year. They've also got the best player, arguably, in the sport, the best young player. I'm not insulting Aaron Judge here. I'm not insulting Ohtani, but Bobby Witt Jr. is one of the top 5 players in the game. It all starts with him. I get it. But again, this team has gone for it, and they're being rewarded. That is what should be happening all around this sport. Hey, FT fam, I know you guys might be getting sick of us all talking about Viori all the time, but the thing is, We all love wearing Viori, and I love it in particular. And I am not a person, despite what you might see with the bow ties, who is particularly interested even in clothes. But these clothes, what they have, their performance wear, this stuff is so comfortable. I just love wearing it. You can see I'm wearing a button-down shirt right now. This thing fits well. It is comfortable as all get out. And really, in all settings, Viori is a brand that I am comfortable with, comfortable wearing, and just comfortable being in on an almost everyday basis. So, Viori is an investment in your happiness. For our listeners, they are offering 20% off your first purchase. Get yourself some of the most comfortable and versatile clothing on the planet at Viori.com/foul, F-O-U-L. That's VUORI.com/FOUL. Not only will you receive 20% off your first purchase, but enjoy free shipping on any U.S. orders over $75 and free returns. So go to Viori.com/foul and discover the versatility of Viori clothing. Time now for Grillin Ken, the part of the show where I answer your questions. We had a number of good ones this week, but I'm going to focus on just a few. Let's start with the first. This one comes from Terry W., who asked, best baseball book. Now, I'm going to give an answer that might surprise some people. I'm going to talk about a book that maybe a lot of people don't even know about. The book is called Lords of the Realm. It's by John Hellier, and it's subtitled The Real History of Baseball. And what it really is the labor history of baseball, how the union came to form, how the first set of work stoppages happened, and of course, it discusses collusion as well from the late 80s. All of these things that kind of laid the foundation or formed the backdrop of what happened later and what is still happening today. It is explained in great detail, and it is not a dry book by any stretch of the imagination. It is highly entertaining. I highly recommend it. Lords of the Realm by John Hellier. All right, next question. This comes from Thomas Gauvain, who asks, will players like Michael Wacha and Sean Manaea accept their player options? Seems like they could get more money over more years given how well they've pitched this year. Thomas, you are a smart man. And the player options, opt-outs, whatever the language might be in a particular contract, generally speaking, the rule to follow is this. If a player thinks he can get more guaranteed money by going back into the open market, that generally is what the player will do. And in the cases of both Wacha and Manaea, they've had really good years. ERAs in the 3 to 3.5 range. They're just below 3.5, both of them right now. And the salaries that they are due next year, for Manaea, it's $13.5 million, and for Wacha, it's $16 million. Now, yes, there would be guaranteed money. They wouldn't have to worry about going into the open market, but I expect both of those players to get multi-year deals for much more money than that, and good for them, because when you have that player option and you perform at this high a level, you can then go back into free agency and say, okay, let's go. I proved my point. I did what essentially Matt Chapman has done. Bet on myself, and I'm betting and winning. So yes, I expect both of those guys to be free agents this offseason and both to do really well on multi-year deals. And finally, the third question comes from Richard Proctor, who asks, for those teams already out of playoff contention, which team do you think is set up to go on a spending frenzy? Frenzy is a relative term in this sport. There are only a couple of teams that ever engage in spending frenzies. Actually, there might really be only one, the Los Angeles Dodgers last offseason. Everyone else is talking about restraint and discipline and all these words you hear, all the code words for we don't want to really spend money. But I'll give you two teams that should want to spend money. I'll start with the Nationals. Now, they're a team with a lot of young talent. They are pushing forward here, and they've got some really exciting things happening. Their commitments for next season with Patrick Corbin going off the payroll, only $40 million as of right now. So they have room to definitely do some things with the payroll. That doesn't include their arbitration salaries, but they're not going to be prohibitive for them. So yes, they can spend. Now, will their ownership spend, and will the learners wake up again? They've woken up in the past. You remember Scherzer and some of the other things that they've done. Strasburg was another one. I'm not sure. I don't know where their heads are at in terms of Nationals ownership. They're selling the team. They're not selling the team. They don't want to spend seemingly either way. So that's going to be a team to watch for sure. Should they be spending? Absolutely, they should be spending. You cannot win with just kids. The other team to watch, and this is a team that I believe actually will spend, maybe not go on a frenzy, but will spend. That is the Detroit Tigers. They are a much improved club. They've had a nice push in the second half here. They're actually on the fringes of wild card contention, and they have some room to grow, especially on the offensive end. They need some bats, and even if you want to add a number one starter to go with Skubal or a top of the rotation type, that wouldn't be such a bad idea either. Bullpen seems to be coming together, though I don't know how much you can trust all these no-name guys going forward. Their commitments for next season right now, only $38 million. Most of that's tied up in Javi Baez. They have a number of ways that they can go. Third base with Alex Bregman, reuniting with AJ Hinch, that would be one way. And I can give you any number of possibilities. I don't know that Mike Ilitch's son is going to be as aggressive as Mike Ilitch was in spending, but this is a team that is ready to go now in a division that is good and much better than in the past, but at the same time, taking advantage of the White Sox's ineptitude as well. So the Detroit Tigers are a team with a chance next year. But yes, they need to make like the Royals did this year and try to push this thing along. I want to thank everyone for their questions. Thanks for watching, for listening. You know where to find us: YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Like us, subscribe to us, and join us for our second show of the week, Thursday at 12:30 Eastern. It will be myself and Alana Rizzo. Have a great week, everyone.
Let's get that first bet offer going, please. Up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet falls. If you're new to the BetMGM mix, using the bonus code FOUL, F-O-U-L. Sign up and deposit at least $10 into that account to make it happen. And if the bet loses, your bonus bets will be available once your initial wager is settled. Gambling problem or concern? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey everybody, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. Fair Territory airs each week, and we'd love for you to become part of our community. Here's another video you might enjoy. See you next time.